Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Observation Conversations, where today we are very excited because we will be talking about our first ever horror movie. This is a big one. I am joined, of course, as always, with my intrepid co-host, Reid Chrisman. How you doing, Reid?
I'm doing okay. I'm a little sick, so if you hear some coughing or sniffling, um, please don't be too harsh. But I wouldn't miss this for the world, so it's great to be here.
Well, I definitely appreciate you soldiering through to do this because this is a big review. We've never done a horror movie before.
Yeah.
I, for one, am not particularly a big horror fan. How do you feel about it?
Um, I'll put it this way. Horror does not scare me. Thrillers do.
Hmm.
Um, but horror doesn't really do that. I think that's less to do with the genre, but more to do with the um kind of the themes or the source material.
Yes, indeed. Well, Well, I think the movie we're going to be talking about today has no shortage of compelling source material to draw from, and that is because today we are talking about The Conjuring: The Devil Made Me Do It, or The Conjuring 3. And yes, so I think how we're going to structure this is we'll do a short non-spoiler review up top here, and then that'll be your final spoiler warning, and then we'll go into our full spoiler review after that. So,
Mhm.
just for a quick non-spoiler review, how did you feel about this movie? Do you think it was successful? Was it scary? Did it live up to the previous Conjuring films, or was it a letdown?
Um, I think I never actually saw the second Conjuring movie, but I did see the
Hmm.
first. And I remember that, you know, although I was watching it with, we actually watched that together with another mutual friend of ours, but when we were watching it, I found it really funny just because we were with friends. But I could also appreciate that it did have some truly terrifying moments.
Hmm.
And I feel like with this one, when you get into kind of a series of movies that are all kind of the same, each one that follows is a little more predictable than the last. A great example would be the Paranormal Activity
Mm.
franchise. Um, what I did like about this movie is that it was different, um, but I feel like it wasn't necessarily trying to be, and it should
Yeah.
have been. And I'm sure we'll get into that more, but um, I mean there are definitely some scary moments, but for me it was more of like a action thriller type of almost adventure movie or detective type of thing,
Hmm.
rather than just traditional horror.
I would agree with that. I thought that well, first of all, I definitely agree with what you said. I mean, watching horror movies is always better with friends, and that's why I think it's like we both had a better time watching this movie together than we would have separately.
Yeah.
It's nice to be able to quip and make fun of the horrifying situations
Release the
on
tension.
screen. Yeah, because it kind of cuts the tension a bit. But also it's better as a communal experience when you can share the scares together and share the shocking moments together. As far as how this one relates to the previous movies and how I would rate it, I would agree with you that I think you could argue that this movie maybe works better as a thriller than as a true horror movie.
Yeah.
I do not have the highest scare tolerance. I'm not a hardened horror veteran. And while there was certainly there's a lot of tension and a lot of good suspense in this movie, I would be lying if I said I felt particularly scared at any given moment. And we'll talk about more of why that is in the spoiler section. But I thought this movie had great storytelling, was very well acted, looked great, like all the other
Hmm.
Conjuring movies do.
Yeah, great visuals.
Functionally, it was competent and very good on just about every level you can ask of it. But was it particularly scary? If you're looking to have the pants scared off you, you might be disappointed coming out of The Devil
Yeah.
Made Me Do It. But that's not to say that it's not a worthwhile watch if you're a horror fan or not. So I did like it. I liked it a lot, although oddly enough, for someone who doesn't love the feeling of being scared, I kind of left it wishing that I had been a little bit more scared by it.
Yeah.
But that's maybe just because my expectations were built up to an unreasonable level, as they are with every horror movie. Because again, I'm a bit of a scaredy cat. I'm the first to admit. But besides that, I really enjoyed it. It was a really enjoyable watch, made better by watching it with yourself. So let's just go right into our rating. What would you rate this movie on our observation conversation scale?
Oh, I mean, I think my rating is probably going to be a little bit surprising, and I want to give it a thorough explanation, but I think for that we're going to have to leave the spoiler-free territory.
Yeah.
So maybe at this point we want to say, if you haven't seen the movie yet, go see it, come back, and then you can decide how you feel along with how we feel. But I would rate this movie a 5 out of 10.
Okay. Oh,
Um,
fair enough.
and that's not to say I did not enjoy the movie. That's not to say I didn't want to rate it higher. Um, and it's actually funny because if you look at the like critic and audience scores, it is around 50%,
Hmm.
like 53 and 56 or something like that.
Hmm.
Um, for a horror movie, it wasn't that great because it didn't really do anything new.
Hmm.
It's drawing from the same kind of source material, which is like demons possessing person, um, priest, godly figure cures them. They saved. It's like the same old story. You hear it in every single one. There's like a whole franchise, within this universe. Because you have all the Conjuring movies and you have all I think the Annabelle is part of this universe.
Yeah.
Um,
And The Nun and
yeah,
Curse of
La Llorona.
Yeah, La Llorona. Yeah.
Um, and like every single movie kind of uses the same techniques and the same visuals, and that can get kind of stale after a while if you don't kind of refresh it and rejuvenate it.
Yeah.
Um, so as a horror movie, I would say 5 out of 10. But if you look at it as like a kind of action thriller, almost detective, um, I don't want to say like Jason Bourne because that's a little too action heavy, but um, there's like this fun race against the clock, have to figure out this mystery element to it that you don't really see in horror movies. And I think when you focus on that, the movie definitely jumps up higher to, I would probably give it a 7. Um,
Oh.
because you're just they already have this world relatively established, but they establish new rules, and they play with those rules in really interesting ways.
Hmm.
Um, for example, like the wife being able to kind of step foot into this vision of the crime scene, essentially.
Hmm.
She has this gift and she can, kind of put herself into the body of the murderer, um, and retrace exactly what happened. But then you see that like, the husband was like trying to help her and interfere, um, and was like reaching out to her, and that caused her to run away in the past,
Hmm.
where she almost like runs over the gorge and falls into the river. And like
Hmm.
that's how she finds the movie, but it kind of implies that the actions in the present um created the actions in the past, which is kind of a really interesting mechanic. And they could have like used that more, which
Hmm.
would have been really cool. The idea of possessing bodies that are already dead to control them as like, muscle and
Hmm.
goons, super cool. Would have loved to see more of that.
Hmm.
Um, like you just have like all these cool elements that I don't know how much they've been established in previous movies, but you set up these rules and then you find fun ways to use them in interesting ways. And I think for that reason, the movie actually was really cool.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, and I agree with just about everything you said. I think I'm going to rate it a little bit higher. I think I'm going to give this a solid 7 out of 10. Agreed. As a pure horror film, there are definitely scarier movies that you could find that are kind of in the same weight class as The Conjuring. But the suspense was superb, very thrilling. Again, very well acted. Um, and a great story. I mean, it was a really, really interesting and engaging story, which, I mean, that is really the mark of the strongest horror movies. It's not just about the scares, it's about how invested are you in these characters, because if you're not invested in them at all, if you don't care, you're not going to care if they get brutally killed or not.
Mhm.
You have to be invested, and you are definitely invested in the Warrens and what's going on with them, not just in this movie, but over the course of 3 movies now, we've spent time with them, and we really, we want to see them come out on top, and we're really rooting for them. So I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10. Definitely recommend it. If you're a horror fan, certainly worth a watch. And if you're a non-horror fan, I would recommend, if you want to try it out, try this one out. This one is really solid. It's not too scary, but it's very engaging, and you'll get that suspense, which is what you want out of a good horror film. So
Yeah.
I would certainly recommend it. Yeah, I know we have a lot more to say in the spoiler section. So. With that, we will move over. This was your final warning. We will be going full spoilers from this point forward. Let's talk. Let's dive into this first, because I wanted to mention this right up top. The movie opens with a really, really good, a really good scene that really just, it throws you into the thick of the action,
Oh, yeah.
where the Warrens are assisting in an exorcism of a 10-year-old boy who had been possessed by a demon. And we learn how he came to be possessed later on in the story. But there is, this great long scene of 20-25 minutes up top, which is just this exorcism, and it's the full kind of exorcist treatment, where the demon is well, first he kind of sinister, in a sinister manner approaches the boy, and then he's speaking through the boy, and he's possessed the boy, and he's doing all kinds of voices, and there's a lot of body horror as he's contorting, and there's things are flying off the walls and going everywhere. That was a really cool way to start the movie, and I was immediately engaged in that. What?
The shower scene where like it starts pouring blood, that was like straight out of The Shining.
Yeah, The Shining.
I'm sure that was an intentional parallel, but that was like I saw that happening, I was like, oh my God.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, I mean, right off the bat, I mean, you really have those two homages to classic horror films with The Shining and The Exorcist. And I think both executed very, very well. Um, and so, as we move on, in the course of this exorcism, the demon essentially gives Ed Warren a heart attack, I suppose. And that is the demon gives Ed a heart attack. Then he goes into oh boy, I'm going to Arnie. He essentially possesses Arnie, um, who is kind of the main subject of the possession for the rest of the movie.
Yeah.
And throughout the movie, you have this extra element of suspense. And again, this is really, really very clever. It's not just what is the demon going to do, or what is this occultist who summoned the demon going to do, but also Ed has a very real and legitimate health concern. He has this heart condition, and that just racks up the suspense every time the intensity increases, because there's always that threat that he could essentially have another heart attack.
Yeah.
Um, which would be a very real and immediate health consequence on top of obviously pursuing demons. And so that was very good. Um, so essentially, what did you think about the demon in The Devil Made Me Do It? Because I know that I mean that's I think that's going to be the crux of a lot of potential criticism of the movie. I have some thoughts to say about the demon and how it operates.
Uh, yeah. Well, I'll start off by saying there's kind of a double-edged sword in the way that the demon is portrayed. Um, as a general rule of thumb, when it comes to horror movies, it's always better not to show what the threat is
Yes.
because that kind of lets the audience's mind run wild and like the fear of the unknown is a lot greater. And I remember that being kind of a complaint in the original Conjuring movie because for the first like 40 minutes we don't see what it is.
Yeah.
We just see like darkness in the corner and we see like these hands come out of the void and like that can really freak you out. But as soon as you see this little like gremlin motherfucker with horns like standing on top of the wardrobe, it's like, okay, well that's like significantly less scary than what it
Mm.
was before. And this movie doesn't show the demon, but at the same time, the demon just exists within the people just through possession. And
Yeah.
that also kind of detracts from it because you're still kind of seeing what the monster is. It's just also that person.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, so kind of that double-edged sword. Um, I mean, possession is like a super standard trope. Um, why Arnie had as much free will as he did, I don't really understand, especially
Yeah.
compared to the kid.
Hmm.
Um, but I think it could have been used in a much better way. I remember when watching the original trailer, we just see that shot of Arnie walking down the road. He's
Hmm.
stopped by a cop and he's covered in blood.
Yeah.
It's like, I think I hurt someone. And he
Hmm.
doesn't know.
Yeah.
And it would have been so cool to have, a movie where this guy is not sure if he's possessed because the demon will like stop showing itself to other people,
Hmm.
and it kind of, the demon would almost be like gaslighting Arnie, and causing him to do all sorts of things, but he can't stop it, but then he can't get help because no one believes him, and just like playing into that element, but instead it's like everyone is concerned about Arnie because they know he's possessed, and he's just in a jail cell where he can't really hurt himself, even if the demon takes over, and
Right.
they almost like which I guess is fine because the main villain was not the demon, but the Satanist. But then make the focus on the Satanist more. Don't have her revealed in like the last 15 minutes.
Yeah, no, I agree. And my thing about how the demon operated in this is I wish that the form that the demon took when he was visible would have been a little more consistent than what we got. And I understand why perhaps, that's not necessary. I mean, it is a demon after all. I mean, they can
Yeah,
take whatever form they want. But I feel like because we never really firmly established what this thing was supposed to look like, whereas, you take the first two Conjuring films, I mean, you had the Annabelle doll in the first one and the nun
yep,
in the second one. I mean, those are very recognizable figures, like even if those are only symbols of a greater evil, you can immediately latch onto that. And when you see the Annabelle doll, you're like, you know, oh
oh
shit,
God,
pay
yeah,
attention to this, but because the demon is, it's almost taking it a step a little bit too far beyond what you were saying of, kind of concealing the monster because whatever is existing in your imagination is scarier than what they can show on screen. I feel like they went so far in concealing the monster that it took away a little bit of that tension because I never
yeah.
quite knew what I was supposed to be afraid of, you know it sometimes it was a shadowy figure, sometimes it was this monstrous looking thing, another time it was a face in a waterbed. And it was never really consistent. It would speak to Arnie, but we never really saw it. And
Yeah, never like stood out in the open air or just like, constantly went back to a single post or form.
exactly, yeah, I mean, it's and I think that kind of took away from it a little bit. Like the Annabelle doll is creepy because it's just a really creepy looking doll that happens to be possessed by a demon.
Yeah.
La Llorona is scary
Which,
because
why do demons always possess creepy looking things? Unless, or do the demons make them look creepy? Like, I want to see a demon that like, haunts a Walmart and then like takes controls of like the Lego minifigures.
yeah,
And it's just it's like
yeah,
those can't be scary. That would be really funny, but it's
yeah,
always
that,
creepy
that
things.
yeah, that could be that could be the next Lego movie spin-off.
Yeah.
I'd pay to see that. Couldn't do any worse than the Ninjago movie they made a
Oh
couple
yeah.
years back. So nowhere to go but up. Lego Batman was great though, I must say. Credit
I
where
actually
credit's
haven't.
due. Oh yeah, that one was actually. I think the reason why a lot of people didn't pay attention to it was because it was a Lego movie spin-off, but it was actually really good. Surprisingly so. Very funny, but I digress.
Yeah.
Um, so that was kind of my big critique of it. And that's not to say that there weren't any moments where you weren't really feeling it. Like for instance, the moment where I definitely got the most impact from it was the scene when the little kid is on the waterbed. When the family's first moving into that house. At first you think that it's just a haunted house that already had a demon in it, but we later learn that this occultist actually placed a satanic relic essentially
Yeah.
underneath the house, which acted as a beacon to attract demons there. And so this little kid is like bringing, a box into a bedroom, and he finds this waterbed. And he takes the sheet off it, and it's this house is completely empty, other than seemingly, this one piece of furniture. Which, by the way, I mean, this movie is set in the 70s, and that's very, very 70s as a
Hmm.
waterbed. I always thought it'd be
I've
cool to have.
always wanted to try one. I've always
Yeah,
wanted to
I,
try one.
I,
They
I
look
always thought
so
that
fun.
that would be the coolest thing growing up. Um, and so he finds this waterbed, and he's like laying down on it, and you get these hints of something, almost like some sort of big fish that is swimming around in this waterbed, and then you just see a face imprint that pushes up, from underneath the waterbed, next to where the kid is, and then the kid gets possessed.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was really effective. That was great. But other than that, I mean, the demon is kind of unseen, and I think that's to its detriment. But for me, a part of that is made up by the fact that, as we learn, the demon really isn't. The demon is just kind of is just,
The
for
demon's
lack
kind
of a
of a
better term,
goon.
yeah, he's kind of just doing his job more or less, because the occultist made a pact with Satan, presumably, to that promised that that she would provide three souls, and the demon was just kind of there to collect said souls, and so the demon did really wasn't really acting on any particular initiative of its own, unlike the nun or Annabelle. So yeah, it was I kind of forgave it a little bit in that regard, because the occultist was a really cool spin to put on things, and we'll get to
Yeah.
that. But yeah, as far as the demon itself, it definitely lacked impact compared to the other movies, I thought. Um, so yeah, so as we move along, um, uh, essentially what happens is Arnie, some time has passed from the exorcism to the main action of the movie, and as you said, Arnie seems to have decent control of his free will. The demon isn't like controlling him 24/7. It just kind of
Yep.
comes out whenever it comes out. And Ed is in the hospital recovering from his heart attack, and he tells Lorraine that he saw the demon possess Arnie from the exorcism however long ago. And so Lorraine, calls the cops and says there's going to be a tragedy at so and so location. They go over there. Meanwhile, Arnie works at a dog shelter with his girlfriend and their boss. Um,
Who's
I
also trying to be their best friend and like
yeah,
stoner buddy. It's really weird.
yeah, just generally being a creep, and he's playing a lot of he's just playing a lot of loud music and just generally being a bit of a douchebag. And then at that point, Arnie snaps, the demon takes over. The demon makes Arnie think that the landlord guy is actually a scary monster.
Yep.
And so Arnie stabs the landlord, and then he, as you say, as we saw in the trailer shot, he's walking down the road, and the cops stop him, and he gets arrested for murder, essentially. Um, and again, the main conceit of the movie is that this was the first time that demonic possession was claimed as a legal defense against murder in the United States. And so the Warrens, for the second act of this movie, it kind of becomes a bit of a detective story. The Warrens are going out there trying to find evidence to bolster Arnie's case for demonic possession, why he wasn't in control of his own actions when he killed that guy. And so they go up to Massachusetts because that was where a very similar case had occurred. It was a suspected, satanic thing was going on. Some girls disappeared in the woods, and one of them died. And so the Warrens go up there, and they essentially they make this deal with this cop character where after Lorraine demonstrates that she can help him solve the case of this missing girl. He'll give her the case files that will,
Yep.
give them some greater insight into what's going on back in
Which is
Connecticut with
also just
Arnie.
like a huge coincidence that that case ended up being related to, the occultist.
Yeah,
Kind of lazy writing, but I'll let it slide.
and so we kind of we go on a little bit of a detective subplot in the second act, where they go into the woods, and this is what you were alluding to. This is the first time we really get to, well, not the first time in this movie. We've seen it before in the previous movies, but the first time in this movie where we really get kind of a fuller scope of what Lorraine's psychic abilities are, where she can essentially, she has visions of things that have happened in the past, and so they go back to the spot where the girls were last known to be. And essentially, she has a vision where, as you were saying, she places herself back at the moment where they were, at the moment where all of this stuff was going down. And it's her as the girl in the past, where
Hmm.
she's also very much just standing in the woods in the present. And it's essentially she's not in control because she can't change the events of the past. She's just reliving them as if they happened to her. Um, and
But then the events of the present seem to inform the events of the past, even though she can't control it,
right,
which
yeah,
is really interesting.
it's a little odd, but as you said, it culminates in this scene where Lorraine almost falls off a cliff into the ocean, um, because she's just in this trance. But Ed is able to save her, and that's how they figure out where the body of the missing girl was, because she fell off that cliff. Essentially what happened was the occultist once again left another one of these artifacts, and the demon possessed that girl, and as part of his soul collecting, he forced her to jump off a cliff.
Yeah.
And that's the same thing the demon is trying to do to Arnie. Throughout the movie, Arnie is constantly trying to kill himself because the demon is trying to make him kill himself while he's in prison. But he's in solitary confinement, so he doesn't really get any opportunities to do so. And that's how the demon plans to get the second soul, Arnie's soul. Um, and so they get the case file, and before they go back to Connecticut, the next thing they do is they talk to this priest guy. And I looked it up. This priest has actually been referenced before,
Hmm.
in the first Annabelle movie. This priest was the first time we saw this ram cult. It was featured prominently in the first Annabelle film. And this priest he wasn't in that movie, but he was referenced in that movie as part of the team that was working on that situation. And he, like the Warrens, has a whole basement full of satanic artifacts and things that he's collected. With his stated rationale being, it's safer to keep them all in one place than try to destroy them, because if he destroys them, then there's every possibility it might just release all the evil they were containing in the first place.
Yeah.
So he keeps all this stuff in his basement, and he
Which also, like, why not a safe? Why not a bunker? It's just a bit like there was a whole movie where like kids got down there and accidentally released the Annabelle doll again.
yeah, and that's the
You
thing
would
as
have
well.
thought that he was like, oh shit, maybe I should do more than just have a room in my house dedicated to all these demonic artifacts.
Yeah, and that's the things too, is that the Warrens aren't exactly the best role models either when it comes to safely storing demonic artifacts, because they just have dozens and dozens and dozens of high-level demonic artifacts just in their suburban house.
Yeah, they're just
So
sitting on shelves too. It looks like a china shop.
yeah, it
Like
does.
get a PO box or something. Get a
Yeah,
storage unit at
and
least.
and again, it's not like they live in the middle of nowhere. Like, is this in like their normal suburban house?
Yeah.
So it's so yeah, so it's that's always a plot hole in these movies. But he's got all this stuff. It's there. I guess it's expensive to rent out a bank vault to keep all this stuff. So he's just got him in his basement, and he explains essentially what's going on. He explains that Oh, I forgot. I almost forgot something very important. Before they go to Massachusetts, Lorraine discovers the demonic artifact beneath the house. She's like going underneath the floorboards in this like crawl space underneath the house itself.
Mhm.
And she finds this artifact which is surrounded by like rats and stuff. That was a really creepy scene, because you just know that. I mean, like literally, if something happens down here, there's no way she can get out easily because
Yeah.
you can't run. So but she finds this thing underneath some shroud. And so they take this to the priest guy, and he explains what it is, that it's this, satanic artifact that is used as a beacon to bring demons to Earth, so they can possess people and do your bidding. Um, and yes, and so with armed with this new insight, they go back to Connecticut, and um, as they're going through with this, we check in with Arnie every now and again as he's in prison, and um, again, you have great suspenseful scenes where you're just watching him like negotiate living with this demon who's constantly trying to make him kill himself. There's one scene where he's like mopping up in like a mental ward of the prison, and things start moving around inexplicably. He's not able to sleep because the demon is constantly making noise in his head.
Yep.
He gets put in solitary confinement at one point, but the demon is still with him there, of course, because you're never really solitary when you're
Classic
possessed.
roommates.
Yeah, and so on and so forth. And yes, and so from here we're kind of coming up towards coming towards the climax of the movie, and this is where we get introduced to the occultist figure, and we learn. Well, first of all, have I missed anything important so far? Anything that you want to add?
Um, not really. I mean, I do have some stuff I want to address, but we can get through that. It kind of comes up a little bit later.
Yeah. And so essentially, we learned that when Lorraine was having that vision, investigating what happened to, I believe Kate was the name of the character who disappeared. We learned that essentially um, a psychic link was established between Lorraine and the occultist, and Lorraine kind of moves through this dark tunnel, and well, no, sorry. First the Warrens have to go to where Kate's body is in the morgue, because that's where they'll be able to get more of the visions to see where they should go next.
Yeah.
And so they go to the morgue, and you know poor Lorraine, she has to like hold the hand of this corpse that's been underwater for weeks. um you know but she's able to go in. She's able to get a vision, and she's in this dark tunnel that emerges into like an altar room. And she there's candles and all kinds of satanic stuff going on. And she walks up some stairs, and she can hear the sound of a river flowing and train tracks. And that's going to be important later on. um and that's where we meet the occultist for the first time. And this is where I even said during the movie that this is just like WandaVision, of all things, because in WandaVision episode 7, at the very end of episode 7, you have a very similar scene where you have well, in this case, you have a psychic and a satanic occultist. In WandaVision, you had a malevolent witch and a well, I don't want to say benevolent, but not malevolent witch
Yeah.
having a confrontation. In this one, you have a psychic and a Satanist.
I mean, I,
Um,
I would actually draw a different parallel towards Harry Potter and kind of the psychic link between him and Voldemort,
yeah, well,
where they
that's a
can
good
like
one.
get into each other's heads and like
Yeah,
see what the other person is doing.
it's true. Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's a very good parallel. I think for me, the reason my mind just went to WandaVision first was because the setting was so similar. You're in
Yeah,
like this
yeah.
dark, like
They're like
mysterious, evil
crypt. Yeah.
place, and you have this confrontation. And um, yeah, while this is happening, and while Lorraine is in this mysterious area, you mentioned this. Something else is happening in the morgue. Do you want to explain what goes down in this scene? Because this is one of the high points of the movie.
Oh, so she's kind of stuck in this vision,
Hmm.
wandering through the footsteps of the occultist
Hmm.
and trying to figure out where she is. Um, and she kind of realizes that the um, link goes both ways,
Yeah.
which means the occultist knows where they are and then decides to try to stop them by, I don't know if this was the occultist or just having a demon do it, but they get this body, a corpse in the morgue to kind of rise up. Which every time you go to a morgue in a horror movie, you just know that one of the bodies is going to come to life. It just has
Yeah.
to happen.
Yeah.
But it rises up and starts attacking, and he's like trying to get Lorraine to break the link so that there's no longer a link between. If she can sever the link to the occultist, then that will sever the link between the occultist and the corpse. Because I
Yeah.
guess the link is not based on individual people, but like areas where
Hmm.
those people are. Not super clear, but I mean just the visual of Lorraine finally having the link broken, and then the corpse just kind of falls dead in its track. Like it literally just ragdolls.
Yeah.
That was a great scene. That was kind of scary.
Yeah, yeah. That was, I think, probably certainly one of the high points of the movie. I think
Yeah.
quite possibly the scariest moment of the movie. Great tension in that whole scene because I mean, it's the corpse doesn't just attack immediately. It kind of like stands there and it waits, and it's just this big gross corpse that's just kind of leering. And Ed has to get over to Lorraine, get her to let go of the hand, break the connection, and then get out of this room before obviously the corpse can just rip them to pieces.
Yeah.
And because even though it's a corpse, it still has, like, I guess, demon strength to it. It's not like just like a shambling zombie. But the problem is that Ed has to move closer to where the corpse is to get to Lorraine because she's kind of like in this midpoint, and then turn around, and then leave
Yep.
back out, from the direction he came from. And so, yeah, that was a great scene. But they managed to get out of there. At this point, we've established that this link exists between Lorraine and the occultists.
Can I
They,
can I propose a scene modification?
sure, yeah.
Um, I don't know if this this may have taken away. This might take away from the horror aspect, but definitely improve upon the action. But imagine if instead of what happens, you instead see, the corpse stand up. It's
Mhm.
just kind of standing there, and it starts to march over to Ed. Um, and then he gets into a tussle or a fight with this corpse. Um, I don't know specifically what happens, but somehow he defeats it.
Mhm.
And then he's like, Lorraine, we really need to go. And then all of a sudden, you see all these other corpses in the room sit up
Oh.
simultaneously. And that's when he's like, fuck it, grabs her hand to break the link manually, and they run out.
Oh, that would have been
Or like
awesome.
he does that after they all start like walking towards him, and then you just see this room full of bodies just kind of collapse all at once.
Yeah, that would have been awesome. I would have liked to have seen that. Yeah, that would have been really cool. But yeah, no, it's just the one corpse at this point.
But still
Um,
terrifying.
yeah, a corpse who actually makes a reappearance a little later on when Ed has a vision. Essentially, they get back to Connecticut, and Ed has another health
Also, wait,
scare.
before you get to that, wasn't the corpse the body of the guy that Arnie murdered? Or am I making that up? Because it seems similar, but I'm not
Yeah,
100% certain.
yeah, I don't no, I don't think it was the same one because it was a different place. That was we were still in Massachusetts at that point.
Okay.
Whereas the Arnie thing happened in Connecticut. So I think it was a different corpse, but I see what you mean though, because it is a kind of a similar body type
Yeah,
to the guy that he murdered. And
similar
that
body type and hair.
yeah. But yeah, I mean that could have been a very interesting callback if it was in the same place, but I don't think it was.
Yeah.
But I could be wrong
Never mind.
about that. We watched the movie a few days ago, so we're just going off of memory here. But yes, and so shortly thereafter, Ed has another health scare where first he kind of he kind of is influenced by the occultist, and he tries to attack Lorraine. Um, and then but then he kind of snaps out of it, and then he wakes up in the abandoned house of Arnie's family later on. Essentially, this is after they kind of crack the code and they kind of know what to do. And
Hmm.
they go back to Arnie's family's house. He has an episode where he gets, I guess, possessed, not in the same way that the demon possesses you, but kind of. But it's kind of it's the witch kind of, or pardon me, the occultist kind of influencing his actions, and so.
Yeah, and that's actually something I wish the movie did a better job of differentiating between
Mhm.
is like demonic possession versus like the occultist possession, if you
Yeah.
could even call it that, or like psychic influence. I don't know. They seem too similar, so for me, it's like I couldn't really tell when it was a demon versus when it was her.
Yeah, yeah. And so he tries to attack Lorraine. He then wakes up. Lorraine snaps him out of it. He wakes up in Arnie's family home. It's abandoned. He's kind of walking through, and he has another confrontation with the corpse from the morgue. And then he gets to meet the occultist for the first time, who kind of has a little chat with him, essentially is taunting him.
Mhm.
Um, but at this point, and she, or no, pardon me. I see. I'm getting my events all mixed up. It's after he has this interaction with the occultist that he has another, not another heart attack, but another heart incident, um, which is kind of what puts him out of commission.
Mhm.
But essentially, this point we're kind of moving towards the climax in Act Three. uh Lorraine, and this is where the river and the train tracks kind of come into force, because essentially the girl who jumped off the cliff in Massachusetts, she went to university. She wasn't possessed in Massachusetts. She went to university in Connecticut, which is where the same place where the Arnie thing happened. So they can kind of pinpoint the location of the occultist because both of these events happened in the same kind of area, southern Connecticut.
Mhm.
And so they look at Rivers train tracks, look at locations where you find train tracks that are going over rivers, and it was nighttime, and so they deduce it couldn't have been a passenger train because those don't run at night. It had to have been a freight train. So they look at freight tracks nearby to rivers in that area of the state, and they're
Which
able to
again, like
pinpoint where the
great
occultist
detective
is.
movie material.
Yeah,
Doesn't work as well for a horror, but like, if you go
yeah,
into this thinking it's a detective movie, it's actually really cool.
yeah, and it was interesting. That was an interesting plot point that definitely kind of added to the intrigue of the whole movie. And so she goes back over to the priest, to kind of, try to, because essentially the locations are virtually one and the same. So she goes back over there to confront him, and that's where we get the reveal that the occultist is the priest's daughter. Essentially, he broke his, celibacy vow, and he kind of had this secret daughter, that he raised. And because he was, working on behalf of the Vatican, solving all this demonic stuff and doing all these exorcisms, he was bringing all this demonic stuff home. She kind of got into it and got involved with it, and that's how she got these abilities. Because now she's like an uber occultist Satanist,
Yeah.
and she's made a pact with the devil to to essentially harvest these three souls. Um,
Okay. Yeah, this is the part of the movie that I'm most confused about.
mhm,
They called it a curse, and she needs these three souls to complete the curse.
yeah.
They need like the father, um, the lover, and
Uh,
um,
I think it
some
was the innocent, was it?
the innocent, maybe. I don't know. So
Something like
that
that.
so that would have been like the 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 girl, and then I don't know if the boss was technically one of them, but like she kills her father, who is the also like a heavenly father.
Yeah,
Uh, and then Arnie was going to be the lover. Um, but in the beginning of the movie, when we see this kind of beacon that's under the house and attracted the demons and possessed the kid, it gave the impression that the curse was being placed on the kid or that family.
yeah,
They were being targeted, or that like Arnie was being targeted.
yeah. And I think it was the family that was being targeted. It just so happened the kid was the first one to
Yeah.
find it,
Did
essentially.
we ever find out why she was trying to place this curse on the family? I don't
Uh,
know if we did. I
I
I
well,
don't
I
remember.
I mean, I don't think she was targeting them personally. I think she just was trying to get these souls, and this house was really nearby to where she was, and so she
Yeah,
saw that they
so
were moving out, and she
so
put
that's
the
that's the other thing then is like, what does she get out of completing this curse? She's kind of created a pact with the devil to deliver these three souls, and then
yeah,
what? Well, I
yeah.
don't think
I
we ever
mean,
get that answer.
yeah, I don't think we get that answer definitively, but I mean, I think we can guess. I mean, it's probably one of the usual things, either power or immortality or something else. Some
Yeah.
kind of incredible reward. Um, in her case, I would probably guess more power is probably what she would want. But yeah, it's true. We never really get that definitive answer to that question. But essentially, so we get this reveal that the priest and the occultist are father and daughter, and the priest kind of trapped. He essentially is trying to reconcile with his daughter by trapping Lorraine for her in the tunnels beneath their house. But the occultist kills him. Um, anyway, so it didn't buy him any goodwill. And so that was the second soul that she promised, the devil. And so now the only thing that's left to do is to get Arnie to kill himself, and that will be the third soul, and she's fulfilled her deal.
Yeah.
And so now we kind of have these two main plots going on. You have Ernie in the prison, and you have like almost like a second exorcism scene because the prison chaplain is there with him and his girlfriend is with him, and you have the demon essentially like doing all the exorcism type things, essentially just Yeah, all the body
Yeah.
horror stuff, and essentially trying to finish the job. So you have that going on, and you also have Lorraine in the tunnels under this house, making her way closer to the vision that she had of the altar. Because the conceit of the occultist is once you break this altar, once you destroy the altar, all the power is gone. It's everything just kind of everything kind of comes apart. All the curses come apart. Everything.
Mhm.
Um, and so she's in these tunnels being pursued by the occultist. Also, at this point, Ed realizes, he wakes up, realizes where Lorraine is gone. He goes over there to try to rescue her. And so he gets into the tunnels, but the occultist, again, possesses him, essentially. And he's got this, like, big, like, sledgehammer, and it's essentially 5 minutes of him trying to brutally kill Lorraine with this sledgehammer as he's pursuing her, and that was also a really scary scene. I don't want to say scary, but really suspenseful scene.
It was
Um,
suspenseful, but also like as soon as he grabbed the sledgehammer, I was like, oh, he's gonna accidentally break the altar. Like
yeah,
that
yeah,
was a little predictable, at least for me.
yeah. Yeah,
I don't know.
I didn't see it coming, but I definitely felt the suspense. I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, I didn't actually think there was much risk of Lorraine dying, let alone being murdered by Ed, but it was very suspenseful and it was very
Yeah.
well done because I mean, it's just they're just like trapped in these tight corridors, and he's just like relentless. But as you said, uh, in just as he's about to Lorraine is in front of the altar, and just as a way to take the killing blow, and swing with the sledgehammer, he actually destroys the altar, breaking the curse. So he's no longer controlled by the occultist, and also the demon is no longer possessing Arnie as well. And so Ed and Lorraine are free. Um, Arnie is safe. The exorcism that was happening over there is finished. And essentially, you know, the devil always gets his due. And and in a just delightful moment of poetic justice, the demon comes back to where the occultist is, and the third soul that he's going back to hell with is hers. Essentially, he
Yeah.
brutally kills her, and that's the third soul. And the deal is done. And so the thread is finished. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah, and then Arnie gets off with a charge of manslaughter instead of murder, and then we never actually see the court case, which was the main like appeal of the movie, which
Yeah,
I'm still a little salty about.
it's true. Yeah, that I guess there really could have been more with that, but I do like how tight the movie felt. I mean, it didn't go on
Yeah.
too long, and I
This
appreciated that.
this movie was good. I think it just maybe in marketing, it kind of set itself up to be something different.
Hmm.
It was comprehensive as its own story, but um at least with the trailers, I was led to believe that this would be following, the story of the actual court case that would be going on for extended periods of time and like, what does that entail? How do you convince like the American judicial system that this guy was possessed? And like, do you have like a way to force a possession in the courtroom as evidence or
Yeah,
um, you know, him struggling with this possession and no one believes him or whatever. But we didn't really get much of that, and that's okay. But I would have preferred if they, maybe titled the movie something different,
mm.
or just kind of set up that aspect of it a little bit differently.
Yeah, and also, I'll say this, I think that this movie was generally well directed, but this is the first mainline Conjuring film that wasn't directed by James Wan, and I think that James Wan has perhaps a little bit more of a masterful touch for it than Michael Chavez, who directed this one, did.
Mm.
I mean, this movie very much looked and functioned like a Conjuring film, and again, it was very suspenseful and very thrilling in many
Yeah, I,
parts.
I had no idea it wasn't
Uh,
even directed by the same guy. So
yeah, no, and yeah, I mean, it was still a good movie, but I think that the first two were definitely scarier and more impactful than this one was. You know,
Yeah.
the characters felt a little bit stronger in that one, and just it you felt the threat of the monster a lot more in those than in this one. Um, so, you know, while I don't think Michael Chavez did a bad job, I think that James Wan was really the kind of the secret weapon that this or maybe not so secret weapon that this franchise had, and I hope he comes back to do more of them. I know right now he's busy doing his Aquaman sequel,
Yeah.
but yeah, you know, it felt it felt and functioned very much like the other Conjuring films, but it just was missing that kind of extra oomph, you know, that extra kind of, that vision that you really need to have for super effective horror. And so like there were even many moments in this movie when there were opportunities that for scares that would have been akin to what we saw in the previous films or just other horror movies, where nothing really happened. You know, it was,
Yeah.
you know, and I'm not talking about
That's
jump scares because we don't
yeah,
want
because
jump
that's something you
scares.
talked about when we first watched the movie was, you actually had an appreciation that this movie wasn't
Yeah, yeah, no,
didn't
yeah, no,
utilize jump scares for kind of
yeah,
cheap scares.
and what I'm talking about isn't jump scares. It's
Yeah.
just, being able to fit in more of that foreboding evil into the movie
Yeah.
than there
Yeah.
was. You know, like there was a lot of scenes where something weird or crazy could have been happening in the background, but it was just kind of normal. And that's why when we did get the scares, they were kind of predictable. Like as you said, like the body rising in the morgue and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think the way to best explain it is that this movie had a lot of stuff that was really exciting. At least for
Hmm.
me, I was like, oh shit, that's super cool. I
Yeah,
got like excited, but I wasn't anxious. And I think
yeah.
it needed to kind of pull
That's
at that anxiety
That's
a lot
exactly
more.
right. I'm so glad you said that because that's what those other movies did better that I don't think this one captured quite as well is the anxiety. Like you watch that first Conjuring movie and there is so much anxiety in the moments where you want to have it. You know, I mean, you feel the danger. You don't know what's going to happen next. Whereas in this movie, partly because it is following such a what was at the time such a publicized story, and you have to more closely hew to that historical accuracy. Um, it's you kind of lose a little bit of you lose a decent amount of that anxiety and that tension, which is why I hope in the next one these movies are best when they play a little bit looser with the cases that the Warrens have investigated. Like, the Warrens, I mean, this is a real life couple who actually have had lots of experiences with various paranormal things. Whether you buy into that or not is up to you. But I mean, that's what they insist has happened. And then they're a decently well known, decently well known for these different experiences that they've had. Um, and I think that when you play it a little bit looser, like still take the source material of things things from their story, but then don't worry as much about fitting it within a historical context. That's when I think you like open up a lot more avenues for good scares.
Yeah.
Um, so I did want to say that, but yeah, at the end of the day, definitely not a bad movie by any means. It's just more of a suspense thriller than a horror.
Yeah. And one of the things I was talking to you about after we watched this is that I really want to see like a television adaptation of
Mm,
either the Conjuring universe or just something that blends this kind of detective fiction with the supernatural horror element.
yeah.
Because I was surprised at how well those two worked together.
Hmm.
Whether it was intentional or not, it was really interesting. And, I mentioned this before, but with the way that the movie kind of establishes these rules about what the occultist is able to do versus what Lorraine is able to do and how they kind of engage in these like psychic battles.
Yeah.
And to see that kind of play out and develop over an entire series, um, and like, you could do both episodic and serialized. So every single episode is like a new adventure of like a new investigation and a new demon. like Law and Order SVU, maybe it's like
Hmm.
Law and Order Supernatural Victims Unit. Um, but like throughout each of these episodes, you start laying hints and start laying the groundwork for this cult of
Yeah.
Satanists that is, has some kind of devious plot, and you start to engage in conflicts with them rather than just the demons and how they're using the demons, and like there's so much potential for like powers too. Like imagine if, you know, whether it's the Warrens, if it's like a Conjuring series, or just like, these detectives, like
Hmm.
supernatural detectives, kind of approach an occultist, and they're backed into a corner with no way out. And then the occultist decides to let a demon possess their own body, so then they
Mm.
get that demonic strength, and then
Right.
just like beat their way out. Like that would
Mm.
be so cool.
It would be
That would
awesome.
be
Yeah.
amazing. And I don't know if there's a market for it, but like just from a storytelling and building perspective, that would be so fun.
Yeah.
And that's why I actually really enjoyed The Conjuring, like or The Devil Made Me Do It. 5 out of 10 for it being a horror movie, but 7 out of 10 for just being, the potential this movie has, this world has.
Yeah, the world building was phenomenal, and that's why I loved this idea when you first told me about it. Because I mean, when you really explained it to me, I could see the potential of that. Because this movie, in so many ways, really established. I mean, so many different avenues that you could take for building out that world and have it work in a like call it an 8 episode hour long episode season of television. You would have to do it well. You would have to definitely put the budget behind it and put the talent
Hmm.
behind it. You wouldn't want this to become like a cheap knockoff. But
Oh
if you,
yeah,
yeah, but if you could like do like like how you have the MCU shows, but do that for the Conjuring universe on HBO Max, that
that'd
would
be
be a
so
big hit.
cool.
I
That
think
would
that'd
be
be awesome.
awesome.
Yeah, especially with the occultist, because I'm glad you kind of tied it back around to that, because for me that was my favorite thing that they did from a story perspective. Is, as you were saying, it was really fascinating to have not just a demon but a human rival for the
Yeah,
Warrens in it throughout this story. That just added that extra layer of intrigue and suspense to it that was really cool. And as I said, just the interplay between the two, the interplay between, the Warrens and the occultist, and this link that exists between them, and this conflict, and, the detective story and everything else. I mean, just having the Warrens take on the idea. I mean, it was really cool
it's
having the
like an
Warrens take on.
anti-Warrens.
Exactly, like having the Warrens take on one occultist was awesome. So imagine the Warrens taking on a cabal of a bunch of occultists that are just like, summoning demons, like it's like firefighters and arsonists. Like the
Yeah,
Warrens are
yeah.
the firefighters, and the cultists are the arsonists going around just releasing demons everywhere. That would be
I
awesome.
I can just imagine this great scene where, you know, you have like, one or maybe a couple occultists that are stopped, and um the Warrens or whoever like demolish this altar,
Mhm.
and but the cultists aren't phased, and they actually start laughing, and then you realize that there is actually a series of altars, and
Oh
that this is
yeah,
like a much more advanced curse than initially
right.
thought, after like all the trials and tribulations gone to just destroy this one altar. Like
Yeah,
you could just have a lot of surprise moments like that. I think it'd be really cool if it was a full TV series. I would be like, if they
yeah,
announced one, I would be really scared that it's just gonna be kind of a version of the first or second movie,
right.
but as a TV series. And like
Yeah,
American Horror Story is interesting because that's just like horror, but it's also kind of an overall plot. And that's why I feel like the inspiration really comes from this movie specifically, because it's so much more than just a horror film.
oh
It's
definitely.
it's it's a much more engaging story than the other movies in this universe, I feel like.
Yeah, and I mean, I just imagine the potential of it. I mean, you could have the altars be in like all different locations. Like, like so far, like we've pretty much just been in New England this whole time for all the movies, or at least the main Conjuring movies. But like, if you like had like this nationwide network of Satanists, like I don't want it to go global because then you could
Oh
starts
yeah,
getting
yeah, yeah.
hokey, and it's like
But like if
it's
you,
like this global globe-trotting thing. But if it was like in like different parts of America, that would be fascinating.
yeah, there's like I don't know if you ever saw this anime called Full Metal Alchemist.
Never
Um,
seen it.
but um, basically the ability that a lot of people have is like this ability of alchemy where you can like draw a circle with certain patterns and then that'll let
Mhm.
you to change the molecular structure of whatever's in the circle.
Yeah.
And then like the first when they rebooted the series, the first episode had this guy essentially create a giant alchemy circle around the entire city, and he
Yeah.
was going to try to destroy the city using this giant circle. And you could do the same, like they make a pentagram out of these altars or something.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, yeah. Yeah, and again, you have to be careful because, even as we're describing it, you have to
You don't want
keep
to jump the shark.
yeah,
Yeah,
you have to keep it dark and in the shadows and scary. You don't want this to become Ghostbusters where you've just got a bunch of demons running around in New York. But,
yeah.
you if you can make it bigger and build out the world, but still keep it that kind of very intimate, creepy vibe. And I think that would be brilliant.
Did you ever see True Detective?
I've seen a bit of it. I haven't finished any one of the full seasons, but I've seen a bit of it. Yeah,
Did you see a bit of the first season?
I've seen a bit of the first season. Yeah,
Yeah. Like that kind of vibe. Because that I mean that was like straight detective
right.
stuff, but it had that very spooky element of like the Deep South. And all it was missing was the supernatural. So you just
Yeah, yeah.
there you go. There you go.
I would love to see it. If I were an AT&T HBO Max executive, I would fund your show right now, straight to
Yeah.
series. So yeah, and I wanted to say this as well. This is kind of my last big thought on this, and this is kind of a statement on the whole Conjuring series. And we talked a little bit about this after we finished watching the movie. In the 70s and 80s, well, the reason why I love and appreciate the Conjuring films is because they are a throwback to a time when you had big budget, major talent behind it, horror storytelling and horror movies that were not that didn't fall into the pitfalls of a lot of the tropes that we saw later on. And I'll give you an example, right? In the 70s and 80s, I mean, you had so many of the staples of what we now consider to be the classics of modern horror. Nightmare on Elm Street, The Exorcist, The Shining, which you mentioned, Halloween, Friday the 13th, the original Poltergeist, Aliens, the list goes on.
Hmm.
That was really kind of the golden age for what we think of as great modern horror. I mean, obviously they had their stinkers too, but like they had a lot of shining examples. But then we kind of got into the 2000s, and we start to. I even made a list of them here. We start to see the rise of four kind of trajectories in horror filmmaking, and all of them were more or less wrong. you know so one of the first one is you had this movement towards making horror more PG-13 and more family friendly. We saw this like with the Poltergeist remake, and that was every time they tried to do that, you know I'm sorry, but there's not really a way to do a horror movies that are you could bring your kids to, like on TV there's spooky stuff like Goosebumps, like the old Goosebumps show. I mean,
Hmm.
like that's good quality horror that younger people can watch, but it's a lot harder to do in movies. um like there are some examples that are not terrible, like It from a few years ago. Like that was an example where I think that if you were like not a little kid but like a preteen, like you could get as much out of that as like an adult could,
Yeah.
as far from a scare standpoint. But you know a lot of the PG-13 horror stuff was just hokey and terrible. After that, you had this you had a ton of like these like very shoestring found footage horror movies,
Yep.
like
Paranormal
the
Activity, Blair Witch.
yeah, like all those movies. And yeah, Blair Witch is a good example. Which I mean, obviously indie filmmaking is great, and we support that. But there was just such a glut of super low budget, not very good, jump scare laden horror filmmaking that it just completely oversaturated everything. Like
Yeah.
around the mid 2000s, and it was a mess. Like one of the few shining examples from this category was like the Saw films. Like the first Saw, like Saw and Saw 2 were like really good horror that was on a
Was
low
that even
budget.
found footage though? I thought that
Not,
was
not
mostly
yeah,
just gore and body horror.
yeah, not found footage, but it was like an indie movie. It started out as an indie project.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um,
I got you what you
and
mean.
so yeah, and so that was one of the few examples of that. And then the next category is you had very kind of like very kind of gimmicky horror movies like Final Destination or Insidious or movies like that. Um, where it revolves around a gimmick and not just building on the tension that should exist in a good horror movie. And then the last category is jump scares, which is also just relentless jump scares, not a ton in the way of original ideas, just stick a bunch of scary shit in the shadows and let it jump out and do that for 90 minutes and that's your movie.
Yeah.
Um, and you had all four of these things that kind of came to prominence around the 2000s into the 2010s, and they were all wrong, essentially, in one way or another. But the Conjuring movies came about. The first one came out in, I believe, 2013. And that was the first time since we started to see the rise of these things where we once again got an example of what you can do when you put major talent behind the camera, major talent in front of the camera,
Yep.
good writing, and a big budget behind it, and you can have really good, satisfying, solid horror that doesn't rely on any of these four things. Um, and that's a big part of the reason why the first one was a hit. The second one also did really well, and this one's doing really well too. I mean, even though it was released simultaneously on HBO Max, it's also put up big numbers at the box office. It's coming up on almost 200 million worldwide,
Wow.
on top of being on HBO Max, which is incredible. So that's a big part of the reason why, even though this movie wasn't the scariest movie, I'm so glad that it exists. And I'm so glad that this series exists because it's moving us back towards those classic movies that I named and away from, and showing us a different path from those four kind of cardinal sins of 21st century horror
Yeah.
movies. And so I really appreciate that. And obviously, the Conjuring movie has now kind of become its own sprawling thing with all the spin offs. The first Annabelle movie was terrible. The second one was quite good, and the third one was pretty good, but not great.
Yeah.
The Nun was apparently terrible. La Llorona was apparently terrible. So even within the Conjuring universe, you have a mixed bag, but they're on
Yeah,
the
I
right
I
track.
feel like horror franchises tend not to do well, but individual horror movies
Yeah.
with the right talent, um, they can be really good.
Absolutely, and that's really what I'm getting at is the Conjuring movies, they're solid, the mainline ones, they're solid
Yeah.
and they're on the right track. I'm excited for the next one, I really am. So yeah, I just wanted to say that because that's part of the reason why, as a non-horror fan, I'm still very much a fan of the Conjuring universe because I'm glad that it's kind of showing this different path forward. And I mean, again, to reference it, I mean, I think that it was another example of how now big budget horror filmmaking is actually kind of coming back because it was a big hit, and
Hmm.
it Chapter 2 made a lot of money as well. And we're starting to see more and more of that now. So I'm definitely cheering that on.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think The Conjuring 3 was a success. Just watch it as a thriller suspense detective story, and you'll get the most out of it. I think is the best advice we can give.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Well, any closing thoughts?
I actually don't think so. I got pretty much everything I want to say about this out there. So, um,
Absolutely.
if all of you could leave a like, comment, subscribe,
Absolutely.
that would be
It's
fantastic. We, you know, would love all the support we can get, and thank you for listening.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, everybody. And we will be back next week for a very special July 4th episode. We've got some big things planned, so stay tuned.
All right. Good night, everyone.
Okay, goodbye.